way. So these are my symptoms. Racing pulse. I would often check my pulse, probably, I'm going to guess 30 or 40 times a day, always checking it, always feeling it. And in particular, it became odd checking it right before I was ready to go to bed. I should be calmed down, and it was racing all the time. It was racing all the time, constantly checking my pulse. Great advent is a smartwatch because it checks it for you. So it made life a little bit easier, a little bit tolerable. And my wife would often say, "What are you doing?" And I would, of course, hide it. I'm not checking my pulse, but she knew. Shortness of breath. When I got my diploma, I don't know how many of you were bear hugged when you were a kid. Somebody comes up behind you, pick you up. Hey, how are you? Maybe an uncle, maybe an, whatever, older brother, and squeezed you, and you could breathe, and you could only open your lungs so much. That's how I felt all the time. And it still kind of amazes me that I was able to play basketball and play sports and do all the stuff you do when you're a kid. And I always remember being short of breath, and I would never tell anybody, but it was like that a lot. When I got that diploma, that weight and that bear hug was completely taken off me. And for the first time, really, in a long time, I could do this. I could finally take a huge breath of air, and I couldn't do that for the longest time. So shortness of breath. Lightheaded. When you aren't getting enough oxygen in, and this comes from my doctor, Doc Ranum. I went through all of these things and kind of tried to get the layman's terms, the medicine anxiety for dummies, which I'm not going to try to tell you. But the lightheaded stuff came from just not getting enough oxygen, and truly not getting enough oxygen to your brain. And they say, the doctor would say, the psychiatrist would say that a lot of times people with anxiety oftentimes are holding their breath and they don't even know it. And you just don't really think about it because it's an involuntary thing. So there were probably times where I was not breathing like I should have been. So a lot of lightheadedness. Other symptoms, fidgeting. I'm not a big pencil fidgeter, okay, because I'm not a classroom teacher, but I would tap my foot a lot. One of the times that really strikes me is when we went to Mexico in 2013. I was all worried about making sure we got there, got on the plane. There's a lot of stuff you got to worry about when you travel outside the country, and probably not coupled with anxiety, not the greatest thing. But when we landed and we sat down for lunch, my foot was just tapping the floor all day long. And finally, my wife had to put her hand on my leg, and she said, "Stop." I'm like, "I'm just a little fired up. I'm glad to be here." I was glad to be there because we got through all of the things that gave me that anxiety. But then I started thinking about going home, and I enjoyed most of the vacation for the most part, but for a lot of it, I was nervous about being where we were and are we going to get home and all that stuff that goes in with traveling, except it was probably times 100. Couldn't focus. I had a 5-minute drive to work for the last 27 years. And out of those 27 years, if you add up all the time, I'm going to say that there was about a year's worth of time where when I looked at the speedometer, that's how it looked on a 5-minute drive to school. There were times where I thought I would have to pull over and catch my breath, and I just couldn't see the dashboard. It looked like that. Again, had a little bit to do with not breathing properly, not sleeping enough the night before, a lot of insomnia, and I had to do this quite a bit. And I'm glad I only had the 5-minute drive to school. I can't imagine now I live 25 minutes from school, how that would be, but I don't have to worry about it because I am somewhat anxiety free. So being like that, I'm glad I don't have to live like that. Isolation. One of the things I would do is I would try to isolate. One of the things I heard within the last couple of weeks is when I was in playing sports, I did everything I could to get to the top of the pile. But for most of my life, I didn't want to be on the top of the pile. I wanted to be buried underneath it somewhere, having to deal with anxiety and not wanting to answer questions, not wanting to be anywhere. I wanted to be buried underneath the pile. getting to the top certainly helped me to where I am today. But that dealing with that, I just didn't want to answer questions. I didn't want to be around. Definitely hated meetings. I did not like meetings whatsoever. I would reluctantly go to them because it was part of the gig. But anytime I could try to get out of them, I tried to. And I wanted to isolate. My favorite place in all of Waunakee, two favorite places: my bedroom and my office, because I was the only one there for the most part. And then I would also have to say in front of my students, because they really helped me get out of my own thinking. Other symptoms: insomnia. That's one of the things I could not, I guess I'll talk about this a little more, but I had trouble sleeping. There were times where I had to call in sick because I just didn't think I could teach. I was tired, and any of the sleep that I did get was not probably healthy sleep. I would dread going to sleep, and I would dread going to bed, and I would try to stay up as long as I could, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and get really getting tired so I could sleep through the night. I'd fall asleep, and I'd be up a half an hour later for another hour and a half. Fall asleep, be up for 2 hours, and look at the clock, and all right, it's 5:30. I don't have to get up until 6:30. And I was up the whole time. So it was a struggle trying to get a good night's sleep for a long, long time. Here's something that I thought was a card that was dealt to me by my mother. Genetically, I was with high blood pressure. I had it since about the early 2000s. And that was the start of my revisit with anxiety from when I was a kid. High blood pressure, normal is 120/80. Typically mine was 140 or 150 over somewhere in the hundreds, all the time. And again, I got a cough. Dr. Random gave me one, and just kind of monitor that thing. And I'd put it on middle of the night, wake up middle of the night. It should be down, right? You've been sleeping. It was always up all the time. And eventually, I was up to 3 high blood pressure, high blood pressure medications when it was the toughest. And I gave up drinking alcohol in 2014 because that was one of the things that was present in my life. And I gave that up. And I went from 3 down to 2. And then Doc Random had me come in and took my blood pressure, and it was 60/40. And I had to get off of that stuff. And those numbers might not be correct, but it was really, really low. Once I did that, that helped alleviate some of the anxiety, but not completely. So it definitely helped that it was not necessarily genetic. It had to do with some of the alcohol, but alcohol led to a lot of my anxiety. So once I eliminated that, my health started to come around. But I didn't necessarily in 2014 address the anxiety. Heart attack. I did not have a heart attack. I try to take care of my body as best I can, but I did not have a heart attack. I always felt and I always dreaded or thought of, this is how I'm going to go out. I'm going to have the big one. Unfortunately, it never happened. I needed some coping skills. That's what I needed to go to in order to stave these off. And that's